Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome in and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Emmet. Fellas, we have a great show going off today that's going to give you a lot of information on how to build your team this season and how to dominate and win your league, which is exactly what you're looking for. But first, let's get a quick rundown of what we're going to cover in the show today. Obviously, the opt-out deadline is big-time news. Not that many big-time fantasy football players, however, but still, it just occurred. At 4 o'clock here on Eastern Time. Podcast is being recorded a little after, so all the opt-outs are in official. You can't opt out during the season. Every player is locked in. Later, we're going to go over 10 principles that I want to get into to build your team that are really, you have to follow these principles if you want to win your league. That's the bottom line. We'll get into that later. And then last, I want to get into my 5 do's and my 5 don'ts, meaning 5 players not that highly touted, but you better have them on your team. You better be looking at them. And 5 players, they might be highly touted, but you might want to pass on them for this season. And then we'll also get into a trend that Pro Football Focus has really breaking down to a T. And it's a trend that I think is really important. It's called ADP, annual ADP. ADP, for those of you that don't know, means average draft position. And we'll get into that in the third segment, what that means and what the article meant. So let's get into the news first and the opt-out deadline. Of course, there's, a few notable opt-outs just in terms of, regular players, not fantasy players. Obviously, you have Nate Solder of the Giants. However, he's battling a terrible disease with cancer. You have Dante Howard, the New England Patriots. He's a player that's, been around that system for a while, knows that defense. So it's not going to be the be-all, end-all for Belichick, but still pretty notable. And then you also have, I think, Marquise Goodwin from the Eagles. I think he was going to be their projected starting, slot receiver. So in terms of fantasy, he might have been a guy you take in late round, say, hey, Alshon Jeffries gets hurt, Deshaun Jackson goes down week 1, or heck, he gets cut. But it was something that, if he plays, he might be like a guy you want to add, but it's not really going to be a high draft pick or anything. So fantasy football is going to go on regardless, guys. But still, those are, some, opt-outs that you have to consider because you have to look at the bigger picture. Nate Solder is going to be blocking for Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is going to be a top 5 fantasy player. So what does that mean? Saquon Barkley is going to be running behind a backup left tackle, and that might limit him. That might make him only, have to go one way on the offensive play. Or Jason Garrett's going to look at that and say, heck, we got to, roll Daniel Jones out on every play because this edge is just going to be a free-for-all for defensive ends. So there's bigger pictures to everything, in my opinion, that you have to look at and you have to attend to. And it's just a whole part of an entire process, a whole process that's extremely detailed, and it's going to get you a very, very happy result in your fantasy league if you follow this process. And this is something that's going to be talked about on a whole other podcast, but you're going to see parts of this process in terms of the team building process, which is what we're in right now since it's August. August is team building month, guys. Okay? You have to build your team right here, right now, and you do that with one way, and that's the draft. And believe me, we're going to get into the entire, well, not the entire, but part of the draft process and what you need to do to build your team in the next segment, which is very important. But first, let's really cover this news and what's going to impact this fantasy football season. We have to get into these trades and failed physicals. So if you're really paying attention to NFL news, you're seeing a lot of teams making, minor trades to just take a look at guys. And the reason they're doing this is because you cannot bring in a free agent for a physical. Meaning, if I want to sign Jadeveon Clowney to a contract, I really want to look at him, I need to improve my pass rush, I can't call Jadeveon Clowney's agent if I'm a general manager and ask him, can you please bring in your client for a workout? It's just because of the COVID. You just can't do it. So now, if you want to bring him in, the only way to do that is sign him to a contract. So he's on your roster. So then he has to be in. So you're seeing deals where, example A, I'll give you this. The Oakland Raiders. Did I just say Oakland? That's going to take me a long way to get rid of that. Same with the Washington football team. Give me a break. Anyway, the Las Vegas Raiders. That's what I really like. That's when they were the Raiders, not the pretty boy Las Vegas Raiders. But anyway, they brought in Jeremy Hill, who is a former, he's a high number 2 draft pick by Cincinnati. He was there for his rookie contract, whatever that was, 4 years probably. And they moved on. They didn't think he was any good. Didn't really use him that much as, their pick indicated. If you pick a second running back in the second round, usually you use him a lot. They didn't. He was mainly a backup. Went to New England, blew his knee out, was out of football last year. And, John Gruden sitting around the office, no good old Gruden. He's probably sitting, poor Mike Mayock. He's probably grilling him every day. We got to get a guy in here. We need more juice. So he's saying, well, let's see what this Jeremy Hill kid got. And they said, we can't work this kid out, so what are we going to do? We're going to have to sign him to a contract, bring him in here. Granted, it was probably the vet minimum, which is chump change. And they cut him within a day. Which, the reason they did that is because he was out of shape. And listen, I didn't see the workout. I'm just telling you they did that because they can't bring him in for a workout. All right? Because if he was in shape, you'd keep him on the team at least till the end of training camp. But you cut him in a day, it means he's not in shape. So you're seeing moves like that. And I'll give you, not to rant too long on this topic, but a quick example. In Minnesota, they tried to flip basically a conditional 7th. And if a conditional 7th, guys, is equivalent to probably the pack of gum you see at the dollar store that's been sitting there for 5 months, stale as crap. That's what a conditional 7th equivalates to. But they traded that for PJ Hall. And they basically they didn't cut him, but he had to go back to the Raiders because he was out of shape. So in order for a trade to complete, this is where the Vikings got very clever in trying to avoid this tactic. In order for a trade to complete, a player must pass his physical. Example, Jamal Adams, he passed his physical with Seattle, so the trade went through. PJ Hall didn't pass his physical, so he got cut. So you're looking at this from a grand perspective. If you're an undrafted guy, or you're being a running back, receiver, a tight end maybe, there's going to be talented running backs and talented receivers that are on the streets because coaches are trying to favor these veteran players, and they're not going to have time to bring, an undrafted kid in for a workout. Granted, these coaches barely have time to bring veteran players in for a workout, guys that have some tape on film so, scouts and whatnot can watch and evaluate and see if there'll be a good fit and whatnot. So they have the edge. But, there's going to be some undrafted players that, if you're a dynasty league, you might want to stash some of these guys, even though they might not be on a team. If you're a PPR league, these are your waiver wire guys, So there's going to be a lot of gems out there, and you're going to have to do the job in terms of evaluating these gems because, heck, hopefully it does change where you could bring these dudes in, but I don't think it will the way it's going right now. So if a team decides, they get depleted at running back where, two guys get tested because, one guy's in the room, all the other guys in the room are going to get it. So what if a running back room gets completely depleted before a game? Like, that's going to be craziness. So teams are going to have to call in these guys that other teams cut, these young kids. Basically, they're going to be gearing up on the fly. And, heck, for fantasy purposes, they might be, if they're a starting running back on game day, that might be a good player you want on your team. So it's just so much. I mean, it's hard for me to wrap your head around. If you're listening right now, I don't think you can even wrap your head around this. And granted, I don't blame you. But there's so much in terms of what's going on with these training camps and what's going on with just the whole precautionary that the NFL is taking right now that's really affecting these players. And I do wholeheartedly believe it will trickle down into fantasy football because at the end of the day, we're picking players virtually, right? And it's the same players, it's the same humans we're watching on TV. We're just virtually picking them on our roster. So it's a lot of stuff we're dealing with. But before we get into the break, I wanted to recap pretty much every player that's on the opt-out list. They will not be active this season. The team cannot bring them back at any point this season, even if, everybody gets hurt. They're still on the opt-out list. They're out for the season. We'll just go through, I'll try to go through the notable players, but we'll go by team. Cardinals, they have Marcus Gilbert. He's going to be their starting tackle. Fantasy-wise, that means, Kyler Murray. I know a lot of people think he's, next Lamar, this, that, and the other, but I don't know. Let's watch out with that offensive line, and same with Kenyon Drake. Watch out for that protection. Baltimore Ravens, they have Andre Smith, Anthony Thomas. They're both reserve players. Buffalo Bills, E.J. Gangstar, Lotulelei. Those are both defensive players that McDermott really likes, their head coach, because he knows them from Carolina. I just think they're basically reserve players. I don't see that being an impact for them. Carolina Panthers, Jordan Mack, Christian Miller, same thing, reserve. Bengals, Josh Tupou, reserve player. Chicago Bears, Eddie Goldman. Now, this is a notable player because Eddie Goldman, if you watch Chicago Bears, I know they have the crappy quarterback, but still, when you watch that 34 defense that Vic Fangio had, Eddie Goldman was in the middle of that defense every freaking play, eating blocks up, stuffing running backs. I mean, that is his job, and he does a really good job. He's been doing it. He's a great player at Florida State and never really got recognized as a pro, in my opinion, but still a really solid player. That's going to impact their defense big time, so I would, I think the Bears, best defense in the league is really starting to wear away in terms of fantasy, so I would just make sure you keep that in mind. Cleveland Browns, they have Andrew Billings and a bunch of backup offensive linemen opting out. They just better hope they don't get hurt on the line. Dallas Cowboys, they really don't have anybody notable. They have a fullback, Jameis Olawale, but the other two players they have I don't think would have made the team. Denver Broncos have Jawan James. I think he was a high draft pick by the Miami Dolphins way back, like at least 5 years ago. So they picked him up. He's a reserve player. Detroit Lions, they have Geronimo Allison. He's a longtime player on the Packers. A lot of people call him, he's just a Aaron Rodgers product. Aaron Rodgers made him look good. We'll see this year. At least he still has a good quarterback with Matthew Stafford, but he won't be, or actually we won't see this year because he's on the opt-out list. But hopefully his family's safe. Green Bay Packers, Devin Funchess. He was a former Panthers receiver. Again, they're just trying to find some depth. The Packers have been struggling for wide receiver depth for a while now, and they won't have him this year. Texans have Andy Vanderdoes. He's a reserve lineman. Colts, nobody relevant, basically of reserves. Kansas City Chiefs, they have Damian Williams, the running back. He was not big time, but he was a big-time draft pick. A lot of people I know in my leagues picked him up in the 5th round last year, and, you tell me you pick a guy in the 5th round, he's going to be a starter, and he was not that at all last year. I think his name is going to be in the Pro Football Focus article for ADP because he definitely went down, but that won't impact the Chiefs at all, in my opinion. With Clyde Edwards-Helaire there, their first-round pick, he's going to be getting all the snaps, and I think the value's through the roof for that kid. Las Vegas Raiders don't really have anybody. Los Angeles Rams, one lineman. Jacksonville Jaguars, Rashad Melvin, the corner. And I think most of you guys know this, but that Jacksonville defense, Saxonville, that's dead, guys. Their defense is horrible. And honestly, what are they looking at? They're looking at Trevor Lawrence. All right, they're not going to screw this up. Trevor Lawrence will be a Jacksonville Jaguar. I almost guarantee it. So they're not even competing this year. Miami Dolphins have two receivers, Allen Hurns, a former Cowboy and Jaguar, and Albert Wilson. Both reserve-ish receivers, but solid players, so could impact their offense. Minnesota Vikings, this is a big one. Michael Pierce, their defensive tackle. And we talked about the P.J. Hall trade earlier. That's the reason they tried to trade. They're looking for guys to replace this guy Pierce because they were really, really liking him coming out of free agency and thinking that he was going to be that anchor in the middle of the defense for Mike Zimmer. And it's just not going to be the case this year. So Minnesota, they might be handicapped a little on defense. New England Patriots, they have a lot of names. But, again, Patrick Chung, I mean, he's a notable name because he's been around a while. But he wasn't a big-time player anymore. You know, Belichick wasn't really using him that much. Same with Dante Hightower. I think that's probably the most relevant. But, he's more on the older side. Marcus Cannon, I think it was, sometimes he started for them only with injuries. Marquise Lee, I don't think he was going to make the team. So at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think this is going to impact the Patriots. They always find ways to just bring up a new guy and act like nothing happened. The New Orleans Saints, they have two basically reserve tight ends on the list, Cole Wick and Jaser Van Laan. I don't think any of those guys are going to matter. New York Giants, they have a couple notable ones. They have Nate Solder, the left tackle. We talked about him earlier. And they also have quarterback Sam Beal. I mean, granted, that defense is just horrible, to say the least. I mean, they're slow. They can't cover anybody. They don't get any pressure on the quarterback. That's not defense. So this kid, I think they picked him in the supplemental draft, and they gave up like a third-round pick for him, and, man, that's going to kill him. So he's a no-go this year. Jets, they have linebacker C.J. Mosley on the list. That's really, 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 I mean, that's just a huge blow for the Jets. I mean, they've signed him to a huge deal a couple years ago to get him in, help this defense, and he came on strong one game, and then basically after that it was, he got hurt, and that was it. And he blew I think it was an ACL or something, and, he's supposed to come back this year, and it's not going to work out. So it's a big blow for the Jets. They also have Josh Dotson, the Redskins former Redskins first-round pick on here. Eagles, Marquise Goodwin, we went over that earlier. 49ers have, without Travis Benjamin, who was a receiver for the Browns, I think when Shanahan was the offensive coordinator, so I don't think he'll miss him much. Seattle Seahawks are going to be without Chance Warmack. He's a former high first-round pick, but again, reserve on them. Steelers don't have anybody. The Bucks have a backup lineman, and same with the Titans. And let's give a slow round of applause for the Washington football team's medical staff for not screwing this one up. But that wraps up all the players on the opt-out list. The season's going to go on. I mean, there aren't any notable names for the NFL or the owners to really, brace themselves. The season's going to go on just like it did before. So, it is what it is. But coming right up, guys, we are going to get into 10 team-building philosophies, what I call principles, because they're not rules, they're principles. They're generally the same thing, but you have to follow these 10 principles if you want to dominate your league. And later, 5 do's and 5 don'ts. 5 players you got to have and 5 players you might want to stay away from. Coming right up after the break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back on the GMSC Fantasy Football Podcast. Just went over some opt-out news and news around the league regarding physicals and the whole COVID-19 and training camp and how it's going to affect this season. But honestly, it's going to take 5 podcasts because there's so much going on around the league that we, the viewers and fantasy football players, can't control at all. But what we can control, guys, is how to build a team the right way, the correct way, the way that's going to get you the championship. So I'm going to give you guys 10 team principles that you need to follow if you want to win your league, bottom line. Now, I'm going to start right into it with number 1. And number 1 is build from the running backs out. And I'm going to give you guys a quick story. All right, I'm going to take you all the way back to around, I think it was 2013 or 2012. This was Emmet Wyman's first ever fantasy football draft. I used the first round 5th overall pick on 50 touchdown Peyton Manning, who I think won the MVP that year. I used my second round pick on, I think, A.J. Green. I used my third round pick on another receiver. And then I picked Frank Gore. And I had a carousel of running backs coming through the team. And obviously I didn't do anything that year. I was horrible. It's my first ever year. But after that year, I said to myself, there's no way I'm not going to have good running backs. Meaning I'm going to draft them high every single year, and I'm not going to draft 1. I'm not going to draft 2. I'm going to draft a lot. I'm going to draft as much as possible, and I still follow that strategy to this day. All right. Also want to credit Joseph Robert. He's I don't know if a lot of you fantasy football geeks like myself will know who that is, but he is basically, he runs a podcast called Fantasy Football Counselor, one of the best fantasy football podcasts there is, and he talks about this called the robust running back strategy, and that's a good, very good term to put it. I don't want to steal his language, but it really is what you need to do if you want to build a team, because running backs are not only going to run the ball, they're going to catch the ball, they're going to have, basically, they're your engine to the car. Everything you do revolves around the running back position. If you go up against a team that doesn't have good running backs, you're almost guaranteed to win, because receivers are not going to be consistent every game. I mean, even unless it's Michael Thomas, receivers are not going to put up 100 yards every game, guys. A running back has a very good shot of doing that, and it doesn't have to be 100 rushing. It could be 100 rushing and receiving, or he could have. There's so many games. If you had Aaron Jones last year, there's games he was having like 14 carries for 30 yards, and you're sitting and getting 2 average. You're like, what the heck is this? This is not going to win me anything. Then all of a sudden, he gets a screen pass, takes it 50 yards for a touchdown, and oh my God, you almost win your week. So when you have the ability to have dynamic running backs, you're literally giving yourself a better chance to win every single game, and you could probably beat any team in your league. So principle number 1, draft running backs early and draft a lot of running backs. All right? I'll leave it to you like this. This is basically how important running backs are. NFL general managers always say, we got to build our team from the lines out, the O-line, the D-line. That's the meat of the team. Running backs are your lines in this case. Since there's no O-line, no D-line in fantasy, running backs are going to be that. They're going to substitute that. So RB's out always. Number 2, study depth charts and study volume. Volume, guys. Write that down. Volume. Usage rates. Targets. Those are important statistics that you have to look at. Not yards. I mean, yeah, those are important. But if you really want to start to get into what separates this player from this player, that's a very, very good metric that'll separate them. Because what are you looking for? Especially if you're a PPR, which is 90%, no, I wouldn't say 90, but it's the most popular league format, right? PPR, you get a point. It's points per reception. So you get a point for touching the ball. So why not rather look for these big time names? Just go look up the guys that touch the football the most. Simple, guys. Come on. If you're touching the ball the most, you have the most opportunities to score, right? So always study depth chart and always study volume. And really, I don't expect you to learn. I mean, Heck, I think I do, but I don't know every depth chart in the league off the top of my head. I can't name you. I can give you a good job. I don't think I can name you every starting running back, receiver, tight end, quarterback in the league. So if it comes to a difference between, hey, do I take this player or this running back, this running back, this running back, this receiver, this tight end, look at the usage rates and look at who's going to start more and get more reps, because that's going to give you a higher chance for them to score more points. Now, principle number 3. This is something that I've seen amateur players over and over and over. They don't understand this. Do not draft a quarterback early. Period. Okay? You guys, there is so much value you can get later on in the draft. You do not need to draft a quarterback round 1, round 2, round 3, even round 4. Okay? And the only quarterback that's really going to be acceptable to this, really there's 2, and that's Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And the reason Lamar is the exception is because he had 1,000 yards rushing last year. So when you get a quarterback like that who had a high touchdowns, low interceptions, pretty decent amount of passing yards. I think he passed for like 3,500 yards last year, or maybe close to 4,000. I don't even know. But you have that. And then you add the fact that he's a 1,000-yard rusher and gets like 6-7 touchdowns a year on the ground. That's basically making your fantasy roster look like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, flex, kicker, defense, rather than the standard 2 running backs, 2 receivers. You're literally adding another running back if you have Lamar Jackson. So I could totally understand if you want to consider him. But, I mean, you're telling me you're going to pick a Lamar Jackson over a Zeke? Over a Barkley, over a Dalvin Cook? No way. You can't do that, because I'd rather get a Zeke or Cook or that or whoever and pick up a Drew Brees in round 10. Or I mean every year Drew Brees, guys. For those of you that don't know, now I think Drew Brees is kind of on the down, but still it's hard to bet against him with him and Sean Payton and Michael Thomas and what they got going on down there. I mean, Drew Brees is available every freaking year, like round 8, round 9. So why, if you got a Hall of Fame quarterback sitting there who you know is going to put up 30 touchdowns a year, all right, we don't expect Drew to go back to the old days and throw 50 and this. If he does, then you hit it out of the park. But still, he's going to get 30 touchdowns. He's not going to be careless with the football. No matter what, the yardage is always going to be high with Sean Payton's offense. Why would you draft a guy like a Mahomes way early when you know you're going to get that later? It makes no sense. All right. So the best draft strategy for quarterbacks, I'll get into this in depth later, but always have a guy that you like, and like not one of the top guys. All right. So maybe it could be Dak. Maybe it could be Wilson. Wilson's probably going to get picked high, though, so I don't know if you're going to get him where you want him. But Dak, maybe Brady, maybe Deshaun Watson. Find a guy that you're really going to be confident in and circle that guy and pick him in the late rounds and build your running backs and receivers early. Because, again, principle number 3 and principle number 1 kind of intertwine. You don't pick a quarterback over a running back. I don't care who it is. It's just, you don't do that. So, those are the 3 so far. Number 4, study tight ends. Okay? And what I mean by study tight ends is, yeah, obviously you want to look at every tight end and try to see where these guys are going to go. But this year is completely different. So there's 5 tight ends that are hands down going to be on somebody's team. Hands down. Mark Andrews, Darren Waller the Baller, as I called him, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Zach Ertz. Those 5 are all going to be, they're all top 5 consensus. Every freaking fantasy football ranking has those guys in the top 5. So, what do I mean? Who is number 6? Who is it? Is it Higbee? Is it Evan Ingram? Is it, I was about to say Tyler Eifert. Is it Jason Witten, for crying out loud? Who is it? You have to find that guy out, because I guarantee you, if you're doing the robust running back strategy, you're going running back, receiver, you're sitting there on your high horse. Hey, man, we're looking good. We might get a champ. I'll pick Waller next round. We're going to be good. Boom. It's going to get stolen right out of your hands. And it's not because you got bad luck. It happens to everybody. It happens to me. So what do? You don't sit there and panic. You don't go, my guy's gone. I'm going to be done. I don't win the league. No. You sit there, you take a deep breath, and you go with the next best player available. Okay? It's you literally do the same thing that an NFL team would during a draft. And you could say you're taking it a little too serious if you do it that way, but believe me, you would much rather be organized on draft day and be the guy who's knowing on top of everything than be the guy who's scrolling through 50 freaking tabs back and forth. He's got two computers, 3 TVs open. He's going through every ranking in the world while he's on the clock. Guys, come on. You want to be ready, organized, on top of everything, because that's how you're going to win your league. You will beat people off of organization in fantasy football. I 100% believe that. And when it comes to organization, draft is where you need to be organized. So let's stay on track here. Plan for a bailout option. If you want to know who my bailout option is, stick around to segment 4 because I might give them to you in my 5 do's. Moving on to number 5. This is one that drives me freaking nuts. Do not listen to public consensus. Okay? Public consensus has Odell Beckham as a first-round player. Now, if any of you have been watching football, even Giant fans, Odell Beckham hasn't been a first-round fantasy football player, meaning statistic-wise almost, I'd say, 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns. He hasn't been that player in 3 years. He's been hurt, and then last year he was in Cleveland. So when you're in Cleveland, you always got no shot at being productive, right? It's Cleveland. But another example. Juju Schuster. He was like a top 20 player last year in the rankings. Am I not lying? Literally all the analysts out there, the ESPNs, all of them, they said Juju is going to be the number 1 receiver because because Antonio Brown left, right? He's going to automatically replace Antonio Brown and replicate the same numbers Antonio Brown did. Well, if you watch football, as crazy as Antonio Brown is, he's a much better player than Juju. All right? And that's not saying Juju's bad, but that's just saying how great Antonio was. And if Antonio was getting double teamed, so Juju was getting those easy one-on-ones. Last year, that wasn't the case. So what happened? His numbers dipped. Got to look at stuff like that, guys. Don't listen to the public. Just because Juju's, he's Mr. Fortnite, he's on ESPN, he's this, he's that, that don't mean he's going to be a great fantasy player. You have to look at volume, numbers, depth chart. Remember, guys, look at important stuff. Don't look at popularity. All right, and I can go on and on. I mean, got Le'Veon Bell. This will be my last one. Le'Veon Bell. Everyone in the world, he's going to be great. He's going to return back to what he did in Pittsburgh. How is he going to return to what he did in Pittsburgh when he doesn't have Mike Pouncey blocking for him, David DeCastro, who's just like a 7-time All-Pro, Charlie Villanueva? How's he going to be an All-Pro without them guys in front of him? And he's got these, Jets offensive linemen that are just guys off the street practically. Obviously, he wasn't going to do the same. So please don't listen to the public consensus. Try to do your own homework. Try to do your own research because I'm telling you, there's going to be people in your league that listen to the public consensus and they're going to take the Odells, the Jujus, the whatnot, and they're going to be very sorry. And you won't. So don't do that. Number 6. This probably, considering the times we're in, probably the most important, and that is emphasize depth. Depth is everything this year, guys. Okay? We're in a time where an offensive lineman could have the coronavirus. He could walk into the facility. I think these guys, they get tested, you'd assume, regular, almost daily, right? But it can only take one person to slip in. He has the corona, and he's doing workouts with all the other linemen. All the linemen get it. What's going to happen? And I'm just talking like for football perspective, just NFL for a second, not fantasy. But that could trickle down to fantasy. Why? Same thing. What if oh my God, some reserve running back, let's say Tony Pollard from the Dallas Cowboys, right? Backup running back. Let's say you got Zeke on your fantasy team. Tony Pollard gets the coronavirus. All of a sudden, they're doing workouts. He's doing workouts with Zeke. Zeke gets the coronavirus. Zeke can't play. What are you going to do if you're a Zeke fantasy owner? You're going to have to go looking for another player because he's going to be inactive. I mean, they're not going to hold. Believe me, if once the player gets the coronavirus, they're out for the game, and they might be out for multiple games because then the player's going to have to go through a whole precautionary process, quarantine. They're going to have to do God knows what to their locker and clean that stuff out. Then they're going to have to go through multiple tests to make sure that player doesn't have the virus before he comes back in the facility. So while you're sitting there as a fantasy football player, emphasize depth as much as possible. Meaning in trades, if you have a big time player and somebody's offering you a starting caliber receiver, a starting caliber tight end, or two starters for a big timer, probably a good idea to take the trade this year because you want to have as many pieces as possible on your team and as many pieces to where you're confident throwing the sixth guy on your bench in the starting lineup if you have to. That's how you really want to build your team because there's so much uncertainty this year that you just don't know what's going to happen at any time. This could happen on Saturday before Sunday, guys. Like a player could get sick on Saturday. The game's tomorrow. Ian Rappaport could tweet about it at 10 in the morning on Sunday, and you're sitting there rolling out of bed thinking you're going to win, and oh my God, all of a sudden you're without a running back. You better just be ready to swap the next guy up because that's what it is in the real life. It's going to be the same thing in fantasy. Next man up. So always emphasize depth, and this year you have to emphasize depth. Number 7, let's try to wrap these up quick. Don't buy recency bias, guys. And recency bias is basically something that I've been fooling people forever. I'm still fooling them with recency bias. I'll give you an example, quick example. Last year I drafted Marlon Mack in the 9th round in my league, which is a pretty big steal. And week 1, he had over 100 yards. It was like 130 yards. And any running back that's 130 yards in fantasy, basically, your value is top notch. You're basically one of the most valuable players. So, what do you think happened after he had 130 yards week 1? I got like 5 trade requests. So, you start a bidding war. What is this team offering you? What is this team offering you? What is this team offering you? And it ended up working out to where I traded him to get back Keenan Allen and Darren Waller. And at the time, Darren Waller wasn't really known. He was kind of, just a hot waiver pickup. Now, Darren Waller's a top 5 tight end. Keenan Allen is still an elite receiver. And Marlon Mack is a backup running back. All right, that's not for me to brag and booster, but at the same time, that's to show you, back to number 6, how I emphasize depth, and how number 7, I unloaded someone while they were at their peak. That's basically dumping a stock while it's hot. Well, not hot, but high. Because that's what this is about too. Buy low, sell high. I bought Marlon Mack for a cheap price. I sold him for a very high price, and I got great return. So there's going to be people you could fool with the recency bias. There's going to be people that are going to try to fool you with recency bias. Meaning, if a guy had a big game last week, they're going to come calling, trying to trade him. Don't fall for it, guys. Be the one that's tricking, not the one that's getting tricked, if you know what I mean. Number 8, this is kind of, this is, my friend, he fits on this. Do not buy popular players. It kind of goes back to the consensus rankings thing, but this is for trading. Do not buy popular players, okay? My friend literally traded Nick Chubb for Odell Beckham last year. Like, that's the clear example of violating principle number 8, do not buy popular players. And I'm not just ripping on Odell, but seriously, guys, big names are not going to win you the league. What's going to win you the league? Depth. Having guys who have high volume, touch the ball a lot, reliable, stay healthy. That's what's going to win you the league. Not big names. I guarantee you that. Number 9, during the draft the best player available, but keep balance in mind. Now, what I mean by that, when you're doing your draft board, which we'll get into a whole other podcast later, meaning you need to rank your players 1 through God knows whatever, 200, draft your best player available at every pick you're on the clock. However, you keep balance in mind, meaning if I drafted 2 receivers already, before I drafted my second running back, is it really necessary to draft a third receiver? No. If I have a tight end, a receiver, a running back, and let's say another receiver, should I draft another tight end? No, it's not worth it. You have to keep balance in mind, because you could draft the best player available and bank on, doing some, this is what I used to do. I just bank on, I'm going to do this trade. That's not always going to work out. So you want to just keep in balance in mind. That's why I say keep in mind. Don't make it everything, but keep in mind balance, because sometimes you can get distracted and just start picking up, all these players and might not have a plan to do with them. So always keep balance in mind. And the last and not least at all is study the waiver wire. Number 10, study the waiver wire. If you win the waiver wire, you might win your league, guys. Seriously, you might win the league. The waiver wire is that important. The waiver wire is your only way to acquire free talent, and especially early on. Week 1, Week 2, Week 3, you better be locked into every single player on the waiver wire, because every year there's going to be a player who busts out the waiver wire that nobody even knew was coming. I mean, it happens every year. Example last year, Darren Waller. Nobody knew about Darren Waller. That's why I picked him up round 2. I go, this guy's going to be a starter for the Raiders. Take him. All of a sudden, the guy's a top 5 tight end. And, we're going to get into that later in terms of, who rose and who dropped. And that's going to help you determine, which players are rising, which players are basically on the decline. And that's all going to be covered with the Pro Football Focus article, average draft position, ADP. We're going to get into that next, though, but coming up later, guys, please, 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 you don't want to miss this. The 5 do's, the 5 don'ts, the players that you got to have, and the players you want to stay away from. But coming up, we're going to get into this ADP trend and why it matters in fantasy football.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back here on the GMSC Fantasy Football Podcast. Just went over some news and went over some 10 team-building principles that you guys need to follow. Hopefully you wrote down every single principle. Please rewind it if you didn't, because when you're drafting, when you're doing trades, when you're doing waiver wires, well, one of the principles is waiver wire, but when you're conducting business as your fantasy football GM, quote-unquote, those are the principles you must follow by if you want to win. But anyway, let's get into this article that Pro Football Focus done. I mean, most of you football fans know who Pro Football Focus is. They're basically the number one NFL analytical website, database, whatever you want to call them, in the world. For fantasy, I think they're excellent. I think they break some trends, and a lot of fantasy is numerics at the end of the day. You're going off what player has the best stats. So they're very, very helpful for this. And this is something that I was thinking the other day. I'm like, man, I want to know what the difference is between some of these players' ADP and this year to this year. And they literally did the homework for me and broke every single player down to a T. Well, not every single player, but every single player who has the biggest ADP difference from last year, 2019, to this season, 2020. And again, for those of you that don't know what ADP means, it's average draft position. So basically, if you're looking at ESPN's football rankings when you're doing your draft, you're going to see that it's going to be a slot that says ADP, and it's going to say some weird decimal number, which is going to say like, so for Mike Thomas, it might say like 7.89. Okay, and you're not going to know what the heck that means. But basically what that means is they've calculated every freaking consensus out there possible out of ESPN. Like all the fantasy drafts and every analyst and every single draft, and they calculated what's his average, where does he usually go in the draft. So it's basically a good metric to use for consensus on where these players are going to land in your draft, and it's a really good tool to use. So we're going to get into just a few players at each position that have really gone up and really gone down. And in my opinion, it's really the same thing as the stock. I mean, I used the stock reference last segment, but guys, these players are essentially stocks, right? And they're not stocks on the field, but when you're looking at them from a trading perspective, from, do I release this player, pick up this player, you're looking at them as a stock. You want to buy players who aren't really recognizable, who don't have a lot of clout, who don't have big-time games yet, and you want to sell them once they do have a big-time game or do something notable, or you felt like they reached their peak. Because if you're doing that as a fantasy football GM throughout the year, if you're making those moves, you'll improve your team a lot. I mean a lot, because little incremental moves over time will add up, guys. Believe me, it will. And if you don't think it will, look at your roster from week 1 and then look at your roster from the end of the year. That'll determine whether you did a good job. But let's get into some of these rankings. Now, we're going to go into quarterbacks first, and we'll go into quarterbacks that had the biggest dip in ADP. And the first quarterback they have listed, I mean, I can't even say this guy's name. I call him Faker Mayfield, but we'll call him Baker Mayfield to be respectful, right? He said Baker Mayfield's drop is largely warranted. Mayfield my list is top fade at quarterback position in terms of 2020 ADP versus my personal rankings. He was anyone's idea of a below average signal caller last season by any metric. Metrics include 31st in the league in completion percentage. He can't even complete 60% of his passes. He was 78.8 passer rating, which is 33rd in the league. I think the quarterback in Chicago might be better than that. And he was 33rd on a kept clean rating. So basically, when the pocket's clean, he was 33rd in the league. That's not good at all. I don't care who it is. So in 2019, his ADP was quarterback 4. And that was after his rookie season. So a lot of people thought, hey, man, Freddie Kitchens, Odell Beckham, these are really going to help his offense. I mean, if you were around me, I would have told you opposite. But that's why we go back to number 5 on that team principle, guys. Do not listen to public consensus, because everybody out there, oh my God, the Browns are this, they're that, they're going to win a Super Bowl. How they going to win a Super Bowl? They ain't win a freaking playoff game. Come on. But anyway, I mean, it just gets me riled up, this craziness that some of these fans think. But his dip is from quarterback 4 to quarterback 17. He's projected as the 17th best quarterback this year. That's a huge dip. And we just saw, for the reasons listed, the second quarterback they have listed for the biggest dip is Jared Goff. Now, Jared Goff, they say last season wasn't nearly as bad as 2016 for Goff, but it was a steep regression. And I 100% agree. It was a big-time regression. What I call is basically Sean McVay kind of used every trick in the book, and now he's on his own. But I say he took a steep progression from the player we saw during the previous 2 seasons. He took most of the blame for the offense's disappointing effort, as it was the case with most signal callers with below-average teams. The Rams didn't exactly surround Goff with the league's best roster in 2019, and we have plenty of past evidence from the 25-year-old quarterback performing at a high level. And that's a very good point, because the roster is not the same anymore. That offensive line is garbage for the Rams. They're old, they're slow, they don't move guys off the ball. Todd Gurley's gone now. The receivers are, they don't stay healthy. Brandon Cooks doesn't stay healthy. Cooper Kupp is a phenomenal player, but he doesn't stay healthy. So, Goff was kind of handicapped last year, but at the same time, if you saw what the Rams were doing in 2018, you would realize the Rams weren't winning because Jared Goff was airing it out every play. They were winning because they were running the football with Todd Gurley. Okay, Todd Gurley made that 2018 Rams team. That's why they didn't go all the way. That's why they were stumbling. They kind of stumbled in the Saints game, in the championship game, and they were a flat. They were basically a no-show in the Super Bowl. Okay, and that's because Todd Gurley wasn't there. Todd Gurley was everything to that team. And now without him, for Jared Goff, he's projected as the 19th best quarterback. Oh, boy, he's got a long uphill battle because this quarterback rating under pressure is 60.4. So, and it's not hard to put pressure on the Rams. So if defensive coordinators just be calling up blitzes every play, it's going to be a hard year for Jared Goff. Now, let's go into the biggest risers at the quarterback position. My guy, number 4, Dak Prescott. Last year projected as the 17th best quarterback, and now finally getting the recognition he deserves. He's a top 5 quarterback projected in the rankings. It says the Cowboys' rising fifth-year quarterback hasn't missed a game since entering the league. He's experienced some lows, notably struggling in 2017 and during the first half of 2018 before the team acquired Amari Cooper, and yet Prescott has continuously demonstrated a more than solid fantasy floor and a ceiling throughout his career. Now, giveaway, Dak is one of my players on the Deuce. Okay? Why is he a player on the Deuce? Dak, every year, has gotten better. Every year, he's gotten better. And I'm trying to take, for those of you who don't know, yes, I'm a Cowboys fan, for the side note, but I'm trying to take my fan bias away from this argument. But every year he's gotten into the league, he's gotten better, right? Now let's take it last year. Last year, didn't he lead the league in passing yards? A lot of people don't know that. Dak Prescott led the league in passing yards. And from a fantasy football perspective, that's really good. That's actually what you're looking for. You're looking for players who are going to fill up the stat sheet, and he did that last year. And not only that, he had 5 rushing touchdowns, the second most out of any quarterback in the league not named Lamar Jackson. So if he's going to give you somewhat as a dual threat, which isn't, it's definitely not as heavy as Lamar Jackson. He's not going to rush for 1,000 yards or nothing like that. But Dak is a physical runner. So when in the red zone, they're going to be using him a lot on read options because that could totally fake defenses out. If they're so worried about these receivers and Zeke, Dak is going to easily get 4 or 5 touchdowns rushing just from keeping the ball and walking in with a wide open lane because nobody's going to account for him running. Now, if he's able to do that combined with what they're saying in terms of his projections this year, I'd say passing-wise, 30-plus touchdowns, 10 or less interceptions, close to 5,000 yards, maybe not again, but close. And then you factor in, guys, come on. Pick Dak Prescott. Now, Matthew Stafford was the second quarterback they had listed here, and Stafford went from quarterback 23 to quarterback 13. Said Stafford absolutely soared in his first year with Darrell Bevell calling plays before missing the second half of the season with a broken back. Overall, Stafford easily set career-high marks in touchdown ratio, YPA, which is yards per attempt, average annual yards per completion, quarterback rating, and man, he was balling. He really was balling before that injury. And a lot of the players around him were, myself, huge Matthew Stafford fan. Just the guy I don't really want to say it's consistency because I've seen him perform at big-time plays, big-time stages, but, health combined with, I think he went on the COVID list, but then he got removed from the COVID list because it was a false positive, and, you're starting to see a lot of false positives, unfortunately. That might hurt some players, but you saw a really, really, really good quarterback last year before he got hurt, and guys, I'm telling you, and in terms for a quarterback 2, there might be a good shot you could, scoop up Stafford late. And heck, he might be your quarterback 1 if he's healthy and doing Fogo. So be on the lookout for him. And then the last quarterback they have listed here is Kyler Murray. And I talked a little about Kyler Murray and how he's just getting insane rave. And I'm telling you, I think a lot of this is because of Lamar Jackson. A lot of people are looking at Lamar Jackson insane season. They're saying, is there another way we can get a guy in the 10th round, because that's what Lamar was last year, a 9th round pick, an 8th round, 10th round pick. Is there another way we can get a guy that late who's going to produce an MVP season? And I think people are looking at Kyler because they're saying second year, Cliff Kingsbury, they just got Hopkins. Well, it's looking good on paper, but I don't know about all that. But I'll tell you what, the kid has improved. He's definitely going to improve. It said Murray finished his rookie season as the fantasy's 8th overall quarterback, and he finished 12th in fantasy points per game, which was great. He joined Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin, Dak Prescott, and Russell Wilson as the only rookie quarterbacks to finish among the position's top 12 fantasy performers since 2010. So, yeah, that's good. It's a good start to his career. Is he going to go through the roof? I don't know, because, again, the Cardinals' offensive line is still... They're trying to rebuild it, but I think it's still not complete. I don't think it's what it is. And you need to have a good offensive line with Kyler Murray because, my God, I mean, the guy is so short. He's going to run out of the pocket every play, but you can't have defensive ends hit Kyler Murray. He's way too brittle, and he's way too small to begin impact hits like that. So you have to have a good line with him. And I don't know if the Cardinals have it. That's my only concern. But aside from that, the weapons he picked up, the trajectory he's on, I think that's definitely a good player. Now, let's get into running backs. Biggest fallers in the running back position. Kerryon Johnson. Ouch. It says rookie DeAndre Swift swiftly put the final nail in the Kerryon coffin. Now, that's a little bit of a tongue twister, but I tell you what, that was a really clever line. And they're 100% right because let's just give you that. I'm going to just sum Kerryon up so I don't got to spend all day. Kerryon's hurt, guys. It's unfortunate. He was a great player at Auburn. He was a tough running back. He was old school, physical, what you want in a running back, but it's over, I think. And I think the Lions are saying that with taking DeAndre Swift in the second round. I mean, DeAndre Swift's going to play when he's healthy. Meaning he will start over Kerryon Johnson. I don't think the Lions are going to hold any remorse like they did last year and try to, maybe he comes back, because they saw last year their offense is nothing without a good running game. Well, assuming they don't have Stafford, they're nothing without a good running game. But without Kerryon, they had no balance last year. So I think this year they're going to say, hey, we're just going to go with Swift. Swift's going to stay healthy, and he's going to be our guy. We're not going to trust it. Guys who aren't going to stay healthy. They says here they're picking up guys like Bo Scarborough, who was on the Cowboys. He was a 7th round pick by the Cowboys. J.D. McKissick, Ty Johnson. These guys they were nobodies. These are guys that are on the street now, I believe. So Kerryon pretty much is done, in my opinion. It says this year he's the 44th projected fantasy running back, which basically makes him undraftable. Next running back on the list is Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson... Guys, you can give him up. He's been through Cleveland. Now he's with Houston. Duke Johnson just isn't a good player. That's just my opinion. I don't think he was a good player. He only averages, he said he averages 4 yards per carry, 7.2 per target, 5.4 per touch. He's going to be turning 28 years old. Duke Johnson to me is not a draftable player at all. Last year he was ranked 26, and this year he's ranked 51st, which is, God, it's not even worth wasting a 12th round pick on him. Now, the biggest risers. Number one, this is really, really interesting. Ronald Jones. Now, I don't know why they had him as a riser, because he's actually gone down in the rankings. Believe it or not. Last year he was the 30th ranked running back. This year he's going to be the 60th. The 60th ranked running back. That's crazy. But... there's highlights of a conversation on Bruce Arians, basically, and Jason. There's highlights of a media conversation with Bruce Arians and general manager Jason Light of the Tampa Bay Bucks, basically saying, Arians, I have all the confidence in the world in him. Ronald Jones will be a heck of a player for us. His confidence should be sky high with the kind of training he's had. General manager Jason Light added to that comment saying the guy we're all collectively impressed with right now is Rojo, a.k.a. Ronald Jones. So they're saying he looks great out of training camp. Guys, take that with a grain of salt, honestly, because everybody looks great at training camp. They don't have pads on. Nobody's hitting. The windows are wide open. Everybody looks good at training camps. I've never believed that when somebody says they look good at training camp. The Tampa Bay Bucks also just signed LaShawn McCoy, so that basically means they're not that confident. I don't think they're that confident. If you sign LaShawn McCoy, who's over 30 years old, that means you're desperate at running back. They drafted Keyshawn Bond. Ronald Jones, to me, is a player that you just stay away from. Don't draft. Maybe pick him up on waivers if he does something good early, but I don't think he will. Now, another player that, kind of wanted to say his name, but yeah, he's a breakout candidate, and that's Eagles running back Miles Sanders. Says Sanders has more than met expectations as a rookie, racking up 1,300 yards from scrimmage, 6 touchdowns despite splitting plenty of work with an early drone grinder, Jordan Howard. Now the backfield is seemingly the Sanders show after Howard took his talents to Miami and Philadelphia declined to draft or sign a real threat at running back. There's little reason to ever take the man off the field. And they're basically right as they show a clip of him destroying a Jets defensive back in pass protection. If this guy's going to pass protect, which he can catch the ball, he can run the ball, he can. What does that mean, guys? He's a 3-down running back. Okay? If he's a 3-down running back, principle number 2, high volume. So this is definitely a guy you want to take a look at this year. Last year, he was the 30th ranked running back on ADP. This year, he's the 11th. A lot of people are high on him, and I can definitely understand why. I mean, this kid was a dynamic player in college, so I would completely understand if he has a breakout year this year. Now we're going to move into wide receivers. Now, wide receivers with the biggest faller is interesting because we're going to talk about guys like Mike Williams. Mike Williams. Now, Williams wasn't really I don't know how to say it without pretty much just calling him a bust, because that's kind of what he is. He was a 7th overall pick, and he hasn't done anything in the league so far except get hurt. Williams was a 60th ranked receiver last year. He was a 25th ranked receiver last year, and now he's the 60th ranked receiver. It says Williams led the NFL in yards per reception since entering the league in 2017. And could feasibly lead this new look Chargers offense in targets. Of course, they have Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Hunter Henry, a new quarterback, Tyrod Taylor. So Mike Williams is really just a descending player fantasy-wise with the new quarterback and being a reserve who gets hurt. Player you basically want to stay away from. Descending player. Descending players are players you stay away from. Alshon Jeffries, my God, we even got to get into him. Watch the Eagles. He's freaking slow. You can't be slow at receiver. If you're slow at receiver, cornerbacks are going to have the easiest day in the world. Because even if they think about it, even if the cornerback messes up a route, like he goes the wrong way, he could use his catch-up speed. Most of these guys are athletic. They can just use catch-up speed and get back and knock the ball down. So Alshon Jeffries does nothing for me at this point at receiver. It says a couple other names, Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel, who are both on the Panthers. They were both ranked as in the 60s last year, and now they're in the 30s. Big time, they're like jump 30 spots. I can understand that, but at the end of the day, I think the Panthers are really in rebuild mode, so they're kind of players that I would just hold off on, except they got one receiver I really like that we'll talk about later. Risers, we're going to talk about DK Metcalf, because that's a guy, he's this year, went from 53 all the way up to 19, basically a 40 spot jump, I should say. It says Metcalf's route tree and usage expanded the season went on, and a talented 2019 second-round pick posted exciting 681-1, 161, and 459 performances in the final 3 games of the season. Note that it took Doug Baldwin 4 years and Tyler Lockett 5 years to get triple-digits numbers from Wilson. Metcalf did it as a rookie. That's a very good point. Metcalf is going to be a really highly touted on that Seattle Seahawks offense, and with his size, he could definitely be used in the red zone. So that's a player I would definitely look at as a reserve receiver. Cortland Sutton is another name on here. He went from 50, and now this year his ADP is 25. He demanded a 25% target share last year and 40-yard air market share of the Broncos passing game with Locke for the last month of the season. Now they got a bunch of receivers, so I'd probably lean more with Metcalf over him. They picked up Jerry Jeudy, they picked up KJ Hamlet from Penn State as a burner, and they got Noah Fant as well. So they got a lot of weapons now for him, but still, Cortland Sutton had a really impressive rookie season, and I wouldn't be surprised if he continues that, or second-year season. His rookie year was 2018. That's all they have for receivers. Tight ends, biggest faller, and we'll go run through this real quick. Eric Ebron, I mean, my God, give up on him already. He's been in the league for 6 years, hasn't done anything. Hunter Henry, great player, gets hurt. His ADP was the tight end 3 last year, and now he's a tight end 10. New quarterback and injuries, might want to stay away from him. Jared Cook, he's down 4 spots this year. Jared Cook is old. I mean, that's what he is. He's old. That's why he's really not getting the amount of exposure that a lot of people think he's going to get. However, they mentioned one guy for the biggest risers, and that's Darren Waller, the baller. Guys, if you know me, I'm a huge fan of Darren Waller. I had him last year on my team. The only problem Darren Waller had last year was the Raiders were so slow on the perimeter that they had to defenses were just literally double-teaming Waller every freaking play. This year, that's not going to happen. And it's not because they got Jason Witten. It's because they got Henry Ruggs running a 4-2. They got Brian Edwards, who's this stud that they're raving about. They got Lynn Bowden. They have a lot of perimeter weapons that they're going to use. That's really going to open up the offense and not let safeties double-team Waller anymore. So expect him to have 1,000 yards as a tight end. I'll lock that in right now. I'm very confident saying that. So definitely some players you got to look out for. Mark Andrews as well. He's a player that worked great with Lamar Jackson. They added some talent this year with J.K. Dobbins. And with that system, with the Ravens being the number 1 offense, now they got rid of Hayden Hurst. Great year for Andrews as well coming. So be on the lookout for those names, guys. But coming right up, this is what you've been waiting for. The 5 do's and the 5 don'ts. The 5 players you got to have on your team and the 5 players you might want to stay away from. Coming right up after the break. Stick around, guys.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
We're back here on the GMSC Fantasy Football Podcast, and this is the moment you've been waiting for, guys. My 5 do's, my 5 don'ts. We just recapped team principles. We just recapped all the latest news you need to know. We recapped the ADP trend, and now I'm going to give you the 5 do's and 5 don'ts. These 5 players that, listen, you might not have the opportunity to pick up all 5 of them, but I definitely have them higher than the public consensus would. And these are 5 players that I'd probably have a lot lower than the public consensus would. And we'll get into the reasons why. But let's start off with the 5 do's and the 5 players I'm high on. Number 1, I just gave you one in the previous segment, and that's number 4, Dak Prescott. Again, Dak Prescott, you look at the situation around him. Number 1, financially, he's on a franchise tag. So what does that mean? His refrigerator's empty. All right? When the refrigerator's empty, you get a little hungry. You want to get that contract. So Dak Prescott is not going to blow this year at all. The only way that happens is if a horrific injury happens. God forbid it doesn't. But Dak Prescott will have a good year this year, and he'll probably have a better year than he did last year. Why? He upgraded his receiving core. You swapped Randall Cobb out, who was a good player for a very dynamic, down-the-field, high-catch-the-ball, CeeDee Lamb, do-it-all receiver. Okay? You put that with Amari Cooper. You put that with Michael Gallup. Yeah, the 3 1,000 receivers, it could happen. But the point is, who's throwing the ball with all these 1,000-yard receivers? Dak Prescott, okay? So at least you know the bare minimum. He's going to have at least 4,500 yards this year. The bare minimum would be my guess. So passing yards, that probably means, or passing touchdowns, that means at least 30. At least 30. And you look at that combined with what he got an upgrade at head coach. We don't talk about the coach a lot, but that matters a lot, guys. When you're going from Jason Garrett to an offensive guru and Mike McCarthy, who's worked with the best quarterbacks in the league, a guy named Aaron Rodgers, and I don't want to hear this stuff, oh, Aaron Rodgers carried Mike McCarthy. No, he didn't. Because if you guys know football, when Aaron Rodgers was on the bench when Mike McCarthy first got hired as the Green Bay Packers head coach. Brett Favre was the starting quarterback, not Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was just a first-round pick on the bench. Mike McCarthy said, no, we're going to go with Rodgers. Favre, you're out of here. Sorry, we love you, but you're done. Developed Rodgers, took Rodgers under his wing, and made him the quarterback he is today. Don't let anyone else fool you. All right? Yes, Rodgers is a Hall of Fame player, but let's not act like he woke up out of bed and got all those Hall of Fame traits and talents. McCarthy taught him a lot, and I mean a lot. So I would really, really, really look out for Dak Prescott, because Dak Prescott without McCarthy was a great player, and with McCarthy and this new offense, he's going to be an even better player. And that leads into my second player who I'm really high on, Blake Jarwin. If you listening, I said, who's going to be my tight end 6? Okay, we know the top 5. Everyone's top 5. Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews, Ertz, Waller. Every top 5 in America has that. Who's your 6? Who is your 6? Who's your bailout option? Who's the guy when all 5 of those guys go? Who's going to be your guy? My guy's going to be Blake Jarwin. All right? Why is it going to be Blake Jarwin? Because he's athletic. He can vertically stretch the field. Okay, Jason Witten, old man Jason Witten, had 500 yards on almost 60 receptions last year. Okay, Jason Witten gets no RAC, run after catch. He literally catches the ball and falls down, or he gets driven backwards. He's 38 years old. That happens. All right, Blake Jarwin, he does a lot when he catches the ball. He runs through guys, he'll run around guys, and he's out there looking like CeeDee Lamb when he's running after the ball. Okay? When you factor that in, with the fact that this year he's finally going to be a starter. Last year, or these past 2 years, he had 300 yards for 3 touchdowns. Both seasons, all of that came versus the Giants, right? Say they only want to play him versus the Giants, but everybody else, they got to start Jason Witten. I don't know how that is, but when Blake Jarwin finally he got a contract extension, so he'll finally get the starting job that he deserves this year, and he's not even the number 1 threat in that offense. All right, that might not be good for volume-wise. I can see why you want a counter-argument with that with volume, but in terms of how open he's going to be, safeties are not going to be covering Blake Jarwin. They're going to put a linebacker on him, and you can't put a linebacker on Blake Jarwin. So if I had to give a statistical base for Blake Jarwin, I would say maybe 600 to 700 yards and about 6 touchdowns. And I'll tell you what, doesn't look all that pretty, but if you're getting a late tight end, that's a really, really good pickup. And I guarantee you Blake Jarwin will be on that article next year in terms of big ADP riser. So look out for him. Number 3, we'll finally move away from Cowboys. I know you guys are probably sick of that. Jonathan Taylor, running back, Indianapolis Colts. Now, when you look at Jonathan Taylor's resume, the first thing that sticked out to me is he won the Doak Walker Award twice. And there's only 2 other players in college football history to do that. Their names are number 1, Ricky Williams, one of my favorite players ever. Great player. Loved his attitude, loved his game. And number 2, another one of my favorite players, Darren McFadden, who was a phenomenal player for the Raiders. Really, his career just got wasted, but came to the Cowboys, had 1,000 yards in like year 8. I mean, he was a total complete player that just didn't really see it pan out. But Jonathan Taylor, this kid's going to have it pan out for him. All right? There's no way he's not starting. Same with Swift. When you pick a running back, guys, when you pick a running back in the second round, they're going to start. It's only a matter of time. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, you don't know that. They're going to opt for the veterans, da-da-da-da. I understand that, but please, guys, once they put these guys in the game, they're going to see what they're about. And they're not going to go back to the old players once they see what the young guy could do. All right, and that's the same case. And Jonathan Taylor is going to easily beat up Marlon Mack. All right, we'll see what Marlon Mack is as a player if he goes to another team, but Marlon Mack almost had 1,000 yards behind that Colts offensive line, and he was a kid they picked in the 4th round. This Jonathan Taylor kid might have I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he had over 1,000 his rookie year. And that might seem crazy, but with a Philip Rivers, who's he's more of a conservative quarterback now, they're going to rely heavy on that run game and those big boys up front like Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, to just start mauling guys out the way. So I think they're going to feed the heck out of Jonathan Taylor with the way you could probably get him in the 7th or 8th round. I mean, he's not going to be a guy that I think is going to be highly touted. He'll definitely be drafted in the top 80-ish, I'd say. But if you could get him as your running back 3 or 4, definitely take a look at him because you're going to get happy results. I think you're going to get a 1,000-yard rusher and just a straight dog. Number 4, A.J. Brown, Titans wide receiver. This is a guy, he is not even being talked about by anybody, and I mean anybody in the public. They're not talking about him like they did Juju or Odell. I mean, maybe the fantasy, experts are, but I mean, nobody's talking. This guy had 1,000 yards his rookie year. Okay? Do you understand how hard a receiver to have 1,000 yards his rookie year is? The only receivers that did it the past 5 years are Odell Beckham and Amari Cooper, who are both, I guess you've got to call them both elite receivers. All right? But those are the only guys that had 1,000 yards their rookie year, and this kid did it. And he did it in a running offense. The Titans' offense is running. They literally built the offense around Derrick Henry. Where's it going to run with Henry? Do what you do. The guy's a monster. Try to stop him. That's what they did. And this guy with the, Tannehill was a little limited, but he was good. He didn't turn the ball over. But his second year with the ceiling he has compared to the floor he just set himself with 1,000 yards, I would definitely not be shocked if he even improves on that number. And if he improves on that number, guys, and you get a 1,300-yard receiver in round 6, round 5, you might win your league. You honestly might win your league. So I'd really take a look at this kid. And number 5, he's not really a sleeper. He's a sleeper in my opinion because I don't think that he gets enough respect. And that's Detroit Lions wide receiver Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay is a phenomenal player. If you watch him on tape, Golladay has a way of not only being a precise route runner, he's smooth in and out of breaks, and he can high point the football. He's 6'3", so if you can high point the football, what does that mean? You're a red zone threat. All right, there's a lot of good receivers that aren't good red zone threats, and if you can't score touchdowns, you're not going to be as good as you think you are. So you could be a 1,000-yard receiver, but if you only have 2 touchdowns like Jamison Crowder, you're kind of useless because you think about it. You get 70 yards and no touchdowns, that's a 7-point game. That's kind of mediocre. If you get 60 yards and a touchdown, that's a good game. That's a really good game. And that'll give you probably more than what your projection did. But this kid, Kenny Golladay, combined with the healthy Matthew Stafford, if Matthew Stafford plays 16 games, I don't think it'll happen. Let's say he plays 13 games. Kenny Golladay will be a wide receiver 1 in this league. A 1. He will have over 1,200, 1,300 yards. He'll have at least 10 touchdowns. This is a do-it-all player that just doesn't get a lot of opportunities. Last year he was inconsistent. He showed a lot of good flashes, but he was inconsistent. And I think a lot of the consistency was, I think Matt Patricia has a lot of problems with this system, and 2, they had quarterback issues. So if those things, I don't know if Patricia's going to get his system straightened out, but I definitely think the quarterback situation will straighten out a little bit, and I think Matthew Stafford will love this kid. They're going to feed him the ball, and I really do. I think if Golladay, you should honestly lock in Golladay as your second wide receiver drafted. If you could draft him as your wide receiver 2, you're going to be just fine at wide receiver this year because if the guy you get at wide receiver 1 is going to be good, right? Because he'd be your first receiver picked. The way they're projecting him right now with this round 3, round 4, please pick this guy up, guys. This will definitely be worth it for your team, and he'll help you get the money. Let's go into 5 players that are not so high, not all that, but they're really, they're big names in terms of the public. They really, really like them. And number 1 is Todd Gurley, okay? Just to say with Todd Gurley, guys, if Todd Gurley was going to be returning to the All-Pro form, why would the Rams cut him? Explain that. Why would the Rams release him if they thought he would return to the All-Pro form? He's not going to, guys. His knees are done. And it's just a sad case. He's a great player who just suffered. He had an injury condition coming into the draft in 2015, which is why, he was still a high pick just because the Rams said, screw it, this guy's so damn talented. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if he's going to return back to the form that he had. And I just don't see it, because when you have bad knees, those don't get better. Lee, ask your grandparents. But anyway, Odell Beckham is the next guy. I feel like I said his name 20 times over this 80-minute episode. And the reason is because this is going this is 3 years in a row. 3 years in a row. I mean, if this is 3 years in a row, you're not getting 1,000 yards. What makes you a draftable receiver above the 5th round? I don't see it. I just don't see it. And they might say this year, this is going to be a revenge year. A revenge year? What was last year? Last year wasn't a revenge year? Last year wasn't your year to prove to everyone why Cleveland isn't a joke and why you're a good player and why you're going to help turn the culture around? Nothing's going to change, guys. It's Cleveland. It's Cleveland. They could change coaches. They could change general managers. They could change players. Nothing's going to happen. It's Cleveland. I promise you. I promise you. Nothing will happen. So just lay off Odell for this year, guys. Kenyon Drake is number 3 on my list. I talked about him positively because of his volume. But Kenyon Drake is just such a weird, it's really weird to digest, because I see him this year, I've seen him in round 1, and I can't pick him round 1. I could probably pick him round 3, maybe round 2 if I'm desperate for a running back, but I cannot pick him round 1. All right, Kenyon Drake was basically just a great player all along his career. Great high school player, 4 or 5-star recruit, got committed to Alabama, really got lost in the shuffle in Alabama because they had so many other great players there. They had Derrick Henry, they had Alvin Kamara for a little bit before he transferred. They had T.J. Yeldon. They had, I forget what was his other guy's name. They had a ton of guys just coming through and really taking snaps away from Kenyon Drake. So he ended up being like a 4th-round pick. Miami, same thing. Didn't use him. Basically a reserve running back. Only used when he was injured. Goes on the street. Cardinals pick him up. Cardinals say, we'll use this guy in reserve. Ended up doing all right. Had a couple 100-yard games for him. And I think this year they're going to say, hey, he's our starter. But, what if Kenyon Drake got the gate a couple games in, he gets another one of his injuries, or the Cardinals just say, hey, we're going to go with Chase Edmonds. Don't forget about Chase Edmonds. He's had a couple 100-yard games too, and he's a bigger back, so they're going to put him in the red zone. That's another trade we'll look at in a different podcast, is what players are good in the red zone, because touchdowns matter a lot in fantasy. Give me a player who scores a lot of touchdowns, like an Aaron Jones, over a player who just has a lot of yards, because touchdowns matter. In Kenyon Drake's case, he's a player, again, I'm not going to say no is a whole, even though this is a no. Like Gurley, I'm saying no. Odell, I'm saying no. Drake, I'm saying caution, big time caution, because he's much higher on the public than I would have ever imagined him being. Number 4 is Amari Cooper. And, I don't want to put my Dallas Cowboy down, but still, Amari Cooper is not going to be receiving the volume like he did in 2018. Okay, when Amari was brought in to be the savior of the offense and this, that, and the other, that's when he was a number 1 wide receiver in terms of fantasy, getting you 100 yards, multiple touchdowns a game. Honestly, guys, I just don't see that happening. I think Mike McCarthy's going to want to come in, and he's really going to emphasize ball distribution and giving an even amount to everybody. So he'd rather have Amari at 50 catches, or not 50, maybe like 60 catches a year. Michael Gallup, same thing. CeeDee Lamb, maybe 50. Blake Jarwin, 50. Zeke's 50. So there's only so much the ball can go around, guys. And in terms of volume, Cooper is just not all that right now in terms of productivity. I think last year a lot of people were, upset because he got hurt, and it really took a railing on their season because he wasn't there for the fantasy football playoffs. So honestly, Cooper, if you could get him round 6, round 7, absolutely, but don't make him one of your 2 starters. Don't make him your wide receiver 2. Definitely don't make him your wide receiver 1. Last but not least, Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying this because I think Lamar is a bad player. I'm saying this because Lamar's not going to have the same numbers he did last year. Okay? If you pick Lamar round 2, you're basically saying he will have the same numbers he did last year. And you might want to go back and look at those numbers because they're pretty ridiculous. And he got off to a hot start versus some bad teams like Arizona, Miami, when they just had no talent on defense, and he's over there running for 500 freaking yards a game. All right. I don't think that was going to happen. Does he have a bad year? No. But, again, the public is high on him because he's coming off an MVP season. They have to be high on him. So be very cautious and watch out for him. Guys, that's all I got today. I really, really appreciate you tuning into the podcast, and I really appreciate you guys really taking note of this information. Those are my 5 do's, my 5 don'ts. 5 players that I think the public are a little too low on, but I'm high on: Dak Prescott, Blake Jarwin, Jonathan Taylor, A.J. Brown, and Kenny Golladay. 5 players I think the public is a little too high on that you just might want to shy away from: Todd Gurley, Odell Beckham, Kenyon Drake, Amari Cooper, and Lamar Jackson. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening to the GMSC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GMSC Podcast Network. Folks, if you could please follow the GMSC Podcast Network on social media, and please write a review in on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know if they're up on Apple Podcasts, but if you could please let the entire network know what you thought of the show, what you want to see in the show. It really helps us out. All reviews are welcome. All listeners are welcome. So please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at the GMSC Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. My name's Emmet Wyman. Good night, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.